Good morning, New Braunfels in the 35 corridor. I'm D. Lee Edwards here, the host of the Real Deal Real Estate Show. And today's special guests are Dr. Laurelyn Atterbury, the new NBISD superintendent, and Paul McClarty, chief financial officer for New Braunfels Independent Schools. Now, we'll be discussing voter approval on tax rate. But first, we have a few words from the Braunfels titled Market Report. Today we're looking at Comal County. Sales continue to be solid, though we've seen a continued pullback to 836 homes sold in the last 90 days and 234 in the last 30. These numbers are still above 2022. Availability continues to increase, shockingly, as the rise in under $200,000 houses rose to 31 units, bulk of those being manufactured. 121 homes from 200 to 300,000, 355 from 300 to 400,000, 321 homes from 400 to 500, and 661 homes available over 500,000. The rental market is still saturated with 238 homes in Comal County on the market, and the reason the saturation, over 50% are still out of the reach of most folks, being $2,100 to $2,800 a month. The rental market still is tough, so you need to get out there and hustle for the stuff under the price mark. Mortgage rates have dropped early in the week. We thought we were going to get some reprieve, and Friday we gave the ground back up. 30-year conventional came in at 7.69, 15-year at 7.02, and FHA stayed flat at 7.15. Fed still wants to push us to 8. Let's just hope we catch a break. The bond market was a bit volatile this week with the Israeli crisis. The 91-day T-bill was at 5.345. That was flat, while the 2-year was up a hair to 5.06, and the 10-year was up midweek to 4.711. However, on Friday, it adjusted to 4.637. Now, if that holds, mortgage rates will pull back a little bit next week, but with all the volatility in the market, expect it to be anybody's guess. Now, economy like this, you would suspect housing prices to decline nationally. The problem is supply and demand. It's been the problem all along. The Fed keeps getting it wrong. If you get more supply, we get control of it, and you don't get the inflationary effect that we had on the CPI this week, the Consumer Price Index. And what happened was housing substantiates 50% of that over, in fact. So inflation looked kind of bad. Well, several of the Fed members have said they won't increase rates, but Powell, he just can't help himself but keep hitting the button. Oil prices jumped on Thursday to $4 a barrel, up to 86.62. Early in the week, West Texas Intermediate was at 81. Now, the increase comes as the U.S. started to enforce sanctions, actually, on Russian pricing, holding their crude prices to neighbors at $60 a barrel. This increase comes as we're hitting a button on a lot of things, but there were also 2 attacks on pipeline internationally, and Finland is putting restrictions on access to the pipeline for security reasons. I wonder if we're that smart. Anyway, currently the most violent international time in a long time. Ukraine, Israel, Syria, Africa. Well, Africa's been a mess for a while. We have all of this going on, and it's really tough to maintain a good economy when you have such a traffic wreck out there, when we need stability in the world. We got to rebuild our oil reserves right away because we deleted them, and we've got to build our arsenal back up because we've been given away, like a grandfather that loves his grandkids. It's been tough. Now, one final note on the international issue. Hamas and Hezbollah do not want a two-state solution. Quit talking about it in the media. The Palestinians have turned down 3 times if you actually read history. Hamas does not want peace because they lose power, money, and they, how they get their money? From inciting terrorist acts from the other nations to keep it, in a turmoil. Now, if you don't believe it, have you heard of the PLO lately? See, they made a peace deal, and then they became insignificant. Hamas does not want to be insignificant. Just like in Ireland, when you had a bad economy, you had the IRA, and Sinn Féin was very popular. But when people start making money and you elevate their economics, they really don't want to have a war and destroy all those good things they just bought, like that new car. So pay attention, go back, read history, get an education. We've got some people here that may even talk about that. What a deal. Now, the stock market was a bit bipolar this week. It was up and down, but guess what? We finished the week high, 33,672. S&P was at 4334, and the NASDAQ jumped almost 200 points to 13,356. Man, tech stocks must like chaos, but who knows? So interest rates improved slightly, but the Fed wants 8%. The bond market was up and down and up and down. Oil up and down, stock market up and then down, but then ahead at the end of the week. Home sales in Comal County steady, strong with increased inventory and some price improvements for buyers. We survived Friday the 13th. Now, if we can survive the bad omens of the eclipse in 2.5 hours from now, we might just be okay for another week. So get your eclipse glasses out. Let's watch the coolest event without a cover charge this week. And that, my friends, is the real deal for Saturday, October 14th, And we're back on the Real Deal Real Estate Show with our very special guest, Dr. Lauren Atterbury, the new superintendent of New Braunfels Independent School District, and Chief Financial Officer Paul McClarty. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Hey, glad to have you. Now, this portion of our show is brought to you by Meyer Heating and Air Conditioning, keeping you comfortable all year long. Now, Dr. Atterbury and Mr. McClarty, the public has an option coming up. Registered voters of NBISD have an event coming up which will determine tax rate. Tell us about the upcoming, ready folks, voter approval tax rate election. Also, depending on your dialect, is votre. Okay.
Thank you so much. We also lovingly call it a Vader. So either way, but we absolutely are on the ballot for November, and we're asking voters to consider a tax rate increase for the school district, also known as a voter approval tax rate election. Lawmakers have not increased the basic allotment, which is the minimum funding per student that school districts receive from the state, since 2019. And without additional funding, school districts are no longer able to keep up with inflationary impacts.
Why you have that? What is the current state allocation per student?
It's $6,160 per student, with some adjustments in there for special needs students or other special populations.
So basically, if you looked at a 25 to 28 student classroom, you've got to operate that for 5-6 classes, whatever the case, for about $120,000, $140,000 a classroom, right?
Correct.
Yeah, right. That's going to happen. Okay, so all right. So why do you feel it's important for voters to understand about this?
As we said before, we think that we're asking the voters to consider this. So we're going out to our voters. These 3 additional pennies would generate $2.5 million annually for the school district. Of that money, we would use it to recruit and retain teachers. We know that having high quality staff, specifically teachers in the classroom, helps our entire education system. And we'd also use it to continue to offer academic and extracurricular programs that New Braunfels is known for.
And I think the public has to be aware of is that there's certain things. It's not just like educating 20, 25 students or 28 students or 30 students to a classroom. The issue is when you have special needs students and so on, then that ratio between teacher and students narrows, and many of these are federal and state mandates rather than the direction the school board would like to spend its money. Is that correct?
Correct. It costs more to educate a special needs student. There are smaller class sizes, and they use sometimes they'll use a full classroom for 12 to 14
Right.
children rather than the 22 that we try to keep it at our elementary schools.
And that's a tough thing. Now, what happens if it passes?
So what happens if it passes is, as I mentioned, it's about $2.5 million annually in revenue for the school district. So that's what we would count on.
And primarily toward payroll as you're looking at?
Yes,
right?
about,
Yes,
yeah, go ahead.
it's like your checkbook. It's your monthly, your weekly expenses. It's not like bond programs that are coming up down the road and have been in the past.
And I think another thing the public ought to understand about this is we're not just competing against school districts for talent. Because teachers with an education and bachelor's or master's and all the time in there, we're also competing against free market and the private sector. Mm-hmm. And so to retain quality, you've really got to get up. I mean, if we're talking about minimum wage statewide trying to get to $20 an hour, 15, then school teachers starting at 40 or 50, they get a better deal at Buc-ee's, right? So you're trying to get that up. Right?
We're trying to make sure that we're competitive, that we can hire the best teachers and staff.
Okay. Now, what if it fails?
So the inverse of that would happen. The district would not bring in additional revenue, and we would have to find ways to continue to balance our budget. We did adopt a deficit budget this year, and as we tell everybody, you can operate in a deficit for the short term, but it's not a long-term solution. So we would have to look at ways to reduce
and
expenditures.
that's not a state option. I mean, the issue is the state can't operate at an option. It has to operate within its revenue bounds. Mm-hmm. And so all entities such as that are required by law to live on a balanced budget. Right. You can burn up reserves to a point, but you can't forever.
Yeah, you can't use your savings forever to keep balancing negative situations.
We could get in a conversation about how to spend the money, like one super stadium and all of that, but that's for another day,
One of the more interesting things, too, about this election, when voters go to the booth to vote, they're going to see ballot language that says tax rates are going to increase, and it's going to say by a negative amount. So what happens with school funding is that they are continually compressing the tax rate for local citizens, which is great, local taxpayers. And so in this election, if you vote for the tax rate increase, it'll be about a 15-cent decrease in your overall rate. If you vote against it, then it'll be an 18-cent decrease in your overall rate. So whether you vote for or against it,
it's only a 3% gas.
Yes, it's only a 3-cent change is what we're asking for. But it's significant to know that in either situation, you're gonna see a reduction in your local tax rate.
So again, it goes back to the issue we were talking about before. When you read these, you really need to understand what's going on because the verbiage can take you somewhere you didn't know.
It certainly can. The words that we're required to use by law were written probably 4, 5, 6 years ago, and they were a different time in school funding. School funding at that point wasn't compressing the tax rate like they are now. So they were written to say that you're going to increase your tax rate because literally your tax rate would go up. Now with compressed tax rates, the tax rate's going down even though we're asking for 3 more pennies.
Well, part of that comes from the fact we had or I would say hyperinflation on values of the home and property, and we're about to see that reverse. So in this next tax cycle, a great number of homes are going to pull their value back. So the 3% is probably more of an offset to keep balance than anything. So
you mentioned earlier about getting factual information, and I would encourage people. We have a website that is factual regarding the voter approval tax rate election. And so if you go to nbisdnews.org/elections, you can find everything you ever wanted to know about school finance and the voter approval tax rate election.
Fabulous. And we're back on the Real Deal Real Estate Show with Dr. Utterberry and Superintendent of NBISD and Chief Financial Officer Paul McClarty. And here we go. Now, this segment, folks, is brought to you by Bubba's Smoked Meats and Fancy Sauces. Oh, and Bubba's Backyard for weekend fun. Now, off the subject of voter approval tax rate election, how's the transition going to the new high school? and the dragon mascot, even though I wanted the Minotaur.
We think it's going very well. Last week we had a big reveal of the logo for Long Creek High School. Everybody got to see the LC, got to see the dragon, and we are moving forward and excited to officially rebrand the 9th grade center as Long Creek High School and open up our second comprehensive high school in August of 2024. Huge moment for our district.
Yeah, so next year,
Yes, sir.
it'll be full on the ground.
Yes, sir. It will be grades 9 and 10 is how we open up.
Right,
in
all
high
right,
school.
so you're going 9 and 10, 25 is through 11.
Yes, sir.
26 is the full load.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You had a grade,
Oh,
one grade level
graduate.
per year.
Yes.
Till you get to
No master shock. I'm so sad. I think drama and trauma goes together. Okay, now, because of the continued growth and strain, existing capacity is already pushed at almost everything you built. Do we have a bond recommendation coming in this year?
We are currently in the middle of a bond planning committee. We have a group of about 85 community members who've met with us twice now. We meet about every other week, and they are looking at facilities, they're reviewing data, they'll get a demographic report, and then they will decide if we indeed bring a package forward to our board for consideration. As you know, the Board of Trustees is the only entity that can actually call a bond election, so we will possibly bring something to the board for their consideration, and should they choose to call that, that could be effective in May of 24.
Yeah, the good news, I think, for the listeners out there is whatever they propose now, well, this is going to be the one opportunity where we're going to get a reversal to a positive fortune. And everybody's going to go, what are you talking about? So let's say that the school district proposes $350 million, okay? And they're going to make their projections based on current interest rates and the bond market. We're looking at the future bond market with what we do with all the things in the real estate. We're expecting interest rate declines in 24, mid to late year, 25 to normalize to where we should be looking at interest rates for consumers in the fives, and it'll probably stabilize there. So there may be a situation where NBISD is positive at calculating at 6.5 or 7 or 7.5 or 8. Actually, from the bond standpoint, we may be far below that. So you have to watch that. Timing for you folks is everything when you start drawing the money, not when you bonded, So here we go. All right, now, one last time before we're done today, let's go back to tell the listeners about what's going to happen with this voter approval tax rate election.
All right, so we are on the ballot for voters to consider 3 extra pennies. As Mr. McClarty said earlier, either way, the tax rate this year will be less than it was last year. It will either be 18 cents less.
Because of compression.
Absolutely.
Because of
And if
compression.
voters say yes to the voter approval tax rate election, it would be 15 cents less. However, that language will say it's an increase of negative percentage.
Now, between the tax rate adjustment that the counties made, the cities made, and the school district made, your tax rate will look down. It's all going to really hang on your valuations. So I wouldn't greatly worry about that situation. Okay, now, this is just my personal opinion because they can't give one. Okay, it's against the law for them to go, we think you ought to do this. But I think on the 3 items that are going to come before you as voters. Number 1, the state property tax reduction. You know, that $100,000 that they're going to give you for your tax exemption. Yeah, regardless of how it reads, vote yes. Okay. The second one is teacher retirement fund. They're wanting to make an adjustment to their retirement so that they, kind of have COLA like Medicare, that kind of thing, Social Security. So the money's already in the account. It's not going to add any new things in. So vote for that one too. And then finally, for the voter approval tax rate election, you need to vote for this because if you want good teachers and you want to keep the quality of NBISD going in the direction it's going, much better than some of our surrounding neighbors, then you need to write the check. Okay? How can people get a hold of you if they got more questions and want to give you advice or complaints. No.
As I mentioned earlier, the voter approval tax rate election website, nbisdnews.org/elections. And just in general, nbisdnews.org is where we're trying to tell all the great stories of everything happening in the district every day.
Well, thank you. We're glad to have you both on, Paul and Dr.
Pleasure to be
Atterbury.
here. It
Well,
really
great.
is.
Well, we hope to have you back again. Give us an update how the world's going, how you're adjusting to being the new superintendent, and all the people that have advice for you. So when I was a school board trustee, when I was the president, I'm running for a second term, they asked me what my platform was. And I said, I promise you one thing. I'm going to tick you all off at least once. And about 90 days into my new term, I got a phone call back that said, you know that promise you made? You're keeping it. And I go, oh, man, what did I do to you? So it's all good. All right, now, folks, next week we'll be back with great real estate information, financial news,